after the clinic was over, I introduced myself. I said, I'm Jim Waldron. I'm 12 years old. I want to be a teaching pro when I get older. I've been studying the game, particularly the golf swing. And I said, I'm really impressed with your ball striker, Mr. Hahn. You have to be one of the best ball strikers in the world. How come you aren't playing on tour for a living? He goes, kid, I was on tour for 10 years, but I got the putting gift so bad, I had 4 or 5 putt every green, couldn't make a cut. So I had to turn to trick shot artistry to make a living. I said, what's the secret of the golf swing? He goes, I'll tell you something. I've been a student of Mr. Hogan's for the last 15 years. And Ben Hogan shared with me a lot of his so-called secrets. He goes, the number one fundamental in golf, according to Ben Hogan, was to set up in rock-solid balance, swing to the top in rock-solid balance, swing to the finish in rock-solid balance. And especially during the strike, from when your hands are about hip height on the right side of your body to hip height on the left side during the strike, he said, you want to feel like your feet are rooted into the ground, like your spikes are 12 inches long.
Hi, this is Michael Goodhand from Meaford, Ontario, Canada, and I play at Stone Tree Golf Course. This is Golf Smarter, episode number 892.
Poor mechanics versus self-sabotage. You may be surprised which is hurting you more with Jim Waldron.
This is Golf Smarter, sharing stories, tips, and insights from great golf minds to help you lower your score and raise your golf IQ. Here's your host, Fred Green.
Welcome back to the Golf Smarter podcast, Jimmy.
Thank you, man. Wonderful to be back with you, as always.
It's good to have you back on. You know, I was looking through my my records here, and I could tell that you've been on a lot. This is your 32nd Golf Smarter appearance.
You're blowing my mind. I can't believe it's been that many.
Yeah. And but
Crazy.
it's been, how many years has it been? We've been doing this. See,
I think you started in 05, right?
I started in 05. The first time you were on was December of 07. It's when I discovered Balance Point Golf Schools.
Yeah, that's right. I remember now. Yeah, that was my birthday. It was right after my birthday, I think.
Oh, wow.
December 7th is my birthday. Yeah.
Oh, happy birthday.
Pearl-
I got to
Pearl
write
Harbor
that.
Day.
Oh, yeah. Everybody know. You were born on a day that lives in infamy.
Day that lives in infamy.
Yeah, I'm writing it down. You are now on my calendar of December 7th. And everyone else is marking it down, too. Make sure you write to Jim and wish him a happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I didn't get to show you. Okay, I'll show you the club later. Remind me to show you this club.
I will.
I'll tell you about it, though. I'll tell you about it because a listener wrote to me and said, boy, Tony Manzoni, I remember when he was one of the founders of Callaway.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and he had come out with a putter called the Purist, and it's got his signature on it.
Oh, that is so cool.
I found this on eBay, and it's nice and clean, and it's got a wooden hickory shaft on it. It even says hickory stick right there, and with an old Callaway grip. So I need to apologize to the audience. You can't see this, Jim has some sort of disease that prevents him from using technology. We have not figured out why, but here we are. It's 32nd time that Jim's been on, and this is just for the audience here. I swear to you, Jim and I spend 30 to 45 minutes just trying to get him on so we can have a conversation every single time. This is how much I love you, Jim Waldron. I spend more time getting you on the show than just recording your conversations with you.
That's true. Yeah, I know.
I mean, didn't you tell me something that you have a friend that won't let you near his office?
Yeah. Yeah, he has this theory that I have like this magical like voodoo power with computers.
It's not magic, man. It's a curse.
Should be hired. Seriously, I could be hired by the National Security Agency as a cyber warrior. I just have to go to Moscow and hang out near the Kremlin. All the computers would shut down.
I'm sure that's exactly what you want to do in your spare time.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But we're here to talk about golf instruction and the Balance Point Golf Schools. You're so prolific in your teaching, and of course, for years we've called you the Yips Whisperer. You have another name for it. I like Yips Whisperer.
Yeah, that's fine. I like it.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Or the Yip Doctor. I sometimes call myself the Yip Doctor.
The Yip Doctor.
Same thing.
Yeah. But Recently I was reading something that you were talking about the most important physical fundamental
is balance.
Is balance.
And I have a story about that. Which one reason, not the only, why I call my company Balance Point, because
that was my next question.
Every teacher has a hierarchy of fundamentals that they believe are important in a certain order. And mine is on the physical side of the game, because there's always a mental aspect, obviously. The most important fundamental, if your mechanics are good enough to break 95 regularly, is balance. And I learned that from Ben Hogan via a student of his named Paul Hahn Sr. Have you ever heard of Paul Hahn, the famous trick shot artist?
No.
Okay, his son, Paul Hahn Jr., does it today, or at least he's still around.
How do you spell his last name?
H-A-H-N.
Okay. I'm going to look him up. Trick shot artist, huh?
Yeah. Back when I was a young up-and-coming junior golfer in Chicago, my mentor was a guy named Charles Evans, also known as Chick Evans.
Yeah.
He's actually more famous for founding the Evans Caddy Scholarship Fund. But he was the number one player in the world from around 1910 to around 1918.
Okay.
And like Bobby Jones, he never turned pro. He retained his amateur status, but he won all the major events back then.
Yeah, in those years, that's what you did. You stayed amateur. There was no money in playing professional golf until sponsorships started to happen.
Exactly. Yeah, and you would know, having interviewed Bobby Jones' grandson, right? Recently.
Right. Yeah.
He was. But anyhow, so he would take myself and a couple other top junior golfers in Chicago to the Western Open. And I had lunch with Mr. Evans. I think it was in '64, if my memory serves. I had lunch with Mr. Evans, the great Tony Lima, who actually died tragically a few months later in a plane crash. He was a private pilot flying to a tour event, and his Cessna crashed. He would have been a multiple major winner if that hadn't happened, if he had lived. And the young Jack Nicklaus. So I'm 12, Nicklaus is 22. We had lunch. And this is a story I tell all my YIP students and all my mental game students when it comes to an aspect of the pre-shot routine, which is how to start your takeaway. We call it the swing trigger ritual. And I had noticed as a young student of the game, thinking it maybe at some point as an adult I would become a teaching professional, which lucky for me turned out to be the case. I was really studying what the tour pros did, both in terms of their swing, their putting strokes, their short game strokes, and the mental side. And I noticed that Nicklaus would spend varying amounts of time over the ball. From on a fast shot, he might spend 15, 20 seconds over the ball, which by today's standards is really slow. And he sometimes stood over the ball for over a minute, idling, shuffling his feet, looking at the target. He got fined thousands of dollars by the PGA Tour Board for slow play.
Wow.
And so I brought this up, and I said, Mr. Nicklaus, could I ask you a question about your mental game, specifically about the pre-shot routine? He said, sure, kid, what do you want to know? I said,
wait, how old were you when you did this?
I was 12. He was 22.
And how did you get face-to-face with him?
Because of Mr. Evans. Because he would take myself and a couple of junior golfers out there and introduce us to the tour pros. And
awesome.
It was kind of a nice one. Yeah, it was kind of a cool thing on his part to do that for us. But so anyhow, I said, I'm a serious student of the game. I want to be a professional when I get older. And I'm noticing all the other players that I'm checking with the sweep hand on my watch are spending almost to the second the same amount of time over the ball before they pull their trigger and start the takeaway. But the amount of time you spend over the ball varies dramatically, but it's definitely on the long end.
What was his face when you said that to him? What was his face? What was his physical reaction?
Let's just say he wasn't too happy. Remind me to tell you the end of the story when I brought this up a long time, 25 years later in Hawaii at the senior skins. He remembered the story, but
oh wow!
Anyhow, so I said, well, when I mentioned the PGA Tour Board, thousands of dollars of fines, that's what really got him kind of a little PO'd. But he said, and I can't tell you what he exactly said because it's a little bit extreme.
Say it. If I have to bleep it, I will.
Oh, he said, F the PGA Tour Board and their $1,000 fines. I'm not going to start my takeaway till I'm good and ready.
Ooh.
That was his response.
Okay.
And I said, which I thought was pretty good for a 12-year-old, okay, how do you know when it's time to start? Which is a big deal in sports psychology in general, in any sport. How do you know when it's time to start the athletic motion? He said, my body tells me. I said, I don't understand, Mr. Nicklaus. What do you mean your body tells me? He said, I wait and I waggle and I shuffle my feet and I look at the target. And when my body wants to start, it starts. And I said, I've tried that and I play worse when I do that way. He goes, why? I go, while I'm waiting to feel comfortable and confident for my body to want to start, negative thoughts enter my mind about like the 20 different ways I'm going to screw up the shot. And he looked at me, he said, why would you let your mind think that way? Don't you want to hit a good shot? I go, of course I do. He goes, well, why would you ever picture the ball going anywhere other than the target? He goes, I only picture the ball going to the target. And of course, I'm thinking in my head, that's because you're an alien and I'm a human being, right? In other words, this guy's
you're Jack Nicklaus.
Jack Nicklaus. So it would never occur to him to hit a bad shot. And seriously, this is what he said. I never think about a bad shot happening, which of course is insane, right? I mean, what a genius the guy is for golf. So, but I met him at the senior skins game in Montalani in 1995 when I opened my schools there. And because I was a sponsor of the program, I had inside the ropes access and dinner with him and Palmer and Chichi Rodriguez and Lee Trevino.
Wow. And
I asked him if he remembered the conversation that he did. It was at Tam O'Shanter Golf Club in 1964-63, one of those 2 years. But anyhow, the moral of the story is that's actually the worst way you can do it, even though it worked for him, obviously.
Sure.
And today, Rory McIlroy does the Nicklaus method and Jordan Spieth does the Nicklaus method, which we call waiting for you to feel comfortable to pull the trigger. And again, for average golfers especially, that's death to do it that way. You don't want to do it that way.
No.
You want to have a little step-by-step routine that never varies, and you start when it's time to start. It takes almost all the stress out of the equation.
Fascinating.
Right? Because there's no time for bad thoughts to happen.
I played at a Pro-Am in Arizona a number of years ago, and there were a bunch of former NBA players. And I think I got a chance, it's a blur to me now, but I think I got a chance to talk to Dr. J, who was on the driving range. And I asked him about his mental game. And his response was, that's for amateurs. I said, what do you mean? He goes, professional golfers, professional athletes don't think about it. We just do it.
There you go. Exactly.
And he says, people who think about the mental game or the mental approach to it, he says, that's just because you have doubt. We don't.
Right.
We're going to go. Right. We're going to go for it every single time because we know that we can. It's like, okay, well, it's kind of end of our conversation.
Well, I've got a great response to that because one of my first professional athlete students was a guy who has I think he still today has the third worst record from free throws in the NBA. Chris Dudley, who played for the Portland Trail Blazers in the last 6 years of his career. He played with the Knicks before that. And he signed up for my golf schools like almost 20 years ago. He never played before. He was about 3 years from retiring from the Blazers and from the NBA in general. And he said to me, do you know about my record from the line? I go, yeah, I do. I'm a big basketball fan. He said, was it free throw yips? And of course, I'd seen him multiple times on TV. I go, yeah, Chris, it was. He goes, if I take your golf instruction, am I going to end up with golf yips? I go, you have no idea who you're talking to. Even back then, I was kind of known in the golf world for helping people with yips. I go, no, if you follow my instructions, you'll never have the yips in golf, ever. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
And?
Yeah, but he's fine. He's a good golfer. He doesn't have the yips.
Amazing.
But the point is, he was thinking over the line. Shaq had the yips at the line as well.
Oh,
They were thinking. They weren't trusting their natural athleticism like Dr. J was talking about.
Yeah.
Huh. Which is interesting. He didn't have the yips only in free throws did both Chris Dudley and Shaq have the yips. Only from the free throw line, never in the flow of the game. Because in the flow of the game, there's no time to think.
Right.
The problem with golf is there's plenty of time to think. Although in Nicklaus's case, he only thought positive thoughts. He said, why would you think negative thoughts? Which is like, again, it's human nature, unless you're a genius, to think negative thoughts, right?
Right. Yeah. All right. We're going to take a time out. We'll be back. Talk more about the yips and negative thoughts after this. Doubt. We all play with it. We all recreational, all amateur players. And I'm sure that, after watching the Netflix show Full Swing, and watching what Brooks Koepka was going through, Yeah, doubt enters every golfer's mind. And, we play out of fear. Pros play out of confidence most of the time. Yeah, mostly.
Yeah.
So let's talk about eliminating doubt, just blocking it out, even for those few seconds when you're standing over the ball. You may have it as you're walking up to your ball and after you hit it, but how do we eliminate that doubt in the few seconds that we have when we're over the ball?
Well, the overarching answer is you need a Tour Pro quality pre-shot routine. That's the overall framework or structure from within which the mental game actually happens, right? So, and that means it's a step-by-step procedure that, well, the first stage, I should say, of 5 in my pre-shot routine is called the plan. So there's innate variation in that because you have to analyze all the shot elements, the lie of the golf ball, the wind, where's the trouble. So that's going to vary. That might take you 5 seconds at your home course that you played 1,000 times, and it might take you 30 seconds or a little bit less than that on a new course. But once you're done with that first stage, the plan, the other 4 stages, second stage is called positive mindset. Third stage is aim and alignment. Fourth stage is your setup checklist. And then the 5th stage is the trigger ritual, which is what the Nicklaus conversation was about. So you have to have that overall structure to be in what sports psychologists call a flow state, where step 1 leads to step 2, which leads to 3 without any effort. Now, that can only happen if you've done enough reps to deeply memorize all the steps. And in my experience, it takes about 2,000 reps off the golf course before you have memorized it deeply to get the benefit of it on the golf course. Right? So you don't have to hit a golf ball. You can do the reps in your living room. You don't even need a driving range. You can do it inside, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the first step. The second step is you have to analyze what is causing me to self-sabotage my performance. It always comes down to basically 2 things, which are your overall psychological mindset and how you use your ability to what psychologists call focused attention or awareness. And the psychological mindset has 2 main aspects, which are the emotional side of your personality and the thinking side. So in that sense, you have to learn how to switch off negative emotions and switch on a positive emotion, or at least a state of no emotions, even better. And you have to learn how to switch from negative thoughts to positive thoughts, right? And then the second part is learning where to focus your mind, which is what I call the focal point, and how to focus your mind there with enough strength, enough clarity to block any negative thoughts or emotions that may want to come in. And that's basically, this is a very overly simplistic explanation or answer to your question, but that's basically what it comes down to. So I guess you could think of those things I just mentioned as skill sets unto themselves. Just like learning how to cock your wrist properly is a skill in golf. Learning how to switch off negative thoughts and replace them with positive thoughts can be seen as a skill. Learning how to transmute fear into courage can be seen as a separate, discrete skill. And that's what I teach people how to do, particularly if they have yips. And the yips is just the extreme example of someone who has a really bad mental game.
Right.
Right? I mean, people who have really bad mental games will eventually end up with some form of the yips if they play golf for a long enough time, right? Generally speaking. They may not be severe yips, but they'll have some form of it. And it's possible to play golf with no fear. I teach people how to do it, right? It's possible to believe that I can do this, pull this shot off, and stay in that positive mindset throughout the entire 5-hour round of golf.
There's listeners all over the world right now shaking their head. They're going, yeah, I can't go there. I can't do that. But what about, and we've had this conversation, and I love having it again because I learn something new every time, about just turning your focus away from the mechanics of hitting a golf ball, of putting your focus externally. Focus,
Correct.
Because listen, you've made, no matter what skill level you're at, no matter what your handicap or your average score is when you're playing golf, you've made good enough shots that bring you back to the golf course. You've made shots that you go, it's like, now that's why I'm here. So you know it's in you. You know it's there, but doubt enters in, and then you stand over the ball going, oh, I better not do this. I got to make sure I don't do that. And you're saying what I don't do, as opposed to just let your body do your thing.
Correct. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, it's somewhat what we're talking about now. The ultimate answer comes down to, is it mostly a mechanical skill answer, or is it mostly in the moment better mental game? And my answer to that is, if your average score is around 95 or lower, it's almost entirely a mental issue. And if it's 96 or higher, it's mostly a physical issue. So that means if you're shooting 110, the mental game stuff isn't going to really help you that much because your mechanics suck, or your balance is terrible, or your tempo is too slow or too fast for your own good. So that guy or gal should spend time off the golf course under the tutelage of a good teaching pro and learn to have better physical skills. Then he or she will find the mental game approach much more effective, right? But if you're below 95, it's particularly if you're below 85, it's almost entirely mental, the question you're posing. Because that means your physical skill is good enough to at worst achieve what tour pros call a decent miss. If that's your goal, is to have no worse than a decent, not even a good, but like a fair miss, right? Where you can still say, like, you might miss the green, but only by 5 feet. Where your next putt or chip, if you're decent at those two shots, you're still going to make par likely, right? But if your miss is 40, 50 yards left or right of the green, and that's your average shot, the mental game isn't going to really help that much, right? It'll help for sure, but it won't help as much as working on the physical side.
Right.
Can we get back to Paul Hahn for a second?
I would love to. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I?
No, it's okay.
Yeah,
right.
Please tell me more, Paul Hahn.
This is at the same tournament, Tamas Center Golf Club. I went like 3 years in a row with Mr. Evans. It was either 63, 64, 65. Anyhow, at the end of that day's round, he put on a trick shot of incredible trick shot artistry, standing on a stepladder 8 feet high with a driver 12 feet long made out of a fiberglass pole, because there were no fiberglass shafts back then, hitting 350-yard drives in the air straight.
No.
Yes.
Oh, my God.
Blindfolded, standing on one leg with only his right hand on the club, hitting perfect 150-yard 7-irons, one after another. Just incredible stuff. I can go on and on, but to save time, I'll tell you the gist of the story. So after the clinic was over, I introduced myself. I said, I'm Jim Waldron. I'm 12 years old. I want to be a teaching pro when I get older. I've been studying the game, particularly the golf swing. And I said, I'm really impressed with your ball striker, Mr. Hahn. You have to be one of the best ball strikers in the world. How come you aren't playing on tour for a living? He goes, kid, I was on tour for 10 years, but I got the putting yips so bad, I had 4 or 5 putt every green, couldn't make a cut. So I had to turn to trick shot artistry to make a living.
Wow.
I said, what's the secret of the golf swing? I want to know. He goes, I'll tell you something. I've been a student of Mr. Hogan's for the last 15 years. And Ben Hogan shared with me a lot of his so-called secrets, or what he also called laws or rules about the golf swing. And he goes, the number one thing on the physical side, because Hogan also was a huge student of the mental game, the number one fundamental in golf, according to Ben Hogan, was to set up in rock-solid balance, Hogan's term, swing to the top in rock-solid balance, swing to the finish in rock-solid balance, and especially during the strike, from when your hands are about hip height on the right side of your body to hip height on the left side during the strike, during the so-called release segment of the swing. He said, you want to feel like your feet are rooted into the ground, like your spikes are 12 inches long. And that's the thing he worked on more than anything else. He worked on other stuff, obviously. But Hogan believed that if you were a little bit off balance, what in biomechanics, that's called the righting or the rebalancing instinct, then the attempt to regain balance will prevent you from falling down on your face, hurting yourself, but it'll ruin your golf swing mechanics. So you never want to have to trigger the righting or rebalancing instinct, because that means you'll use your arms and legs as counterweights, or you'll jump up out of your spine angle to not fall over. And it all takes place unconsciously in a tiny fraction of a second.
Sure.
So that's one reason I call my company Balance Point. So learning how to swing and balance is the quickest way for people who are basically 85 or higher shooters to see significant improvement in the quality of their ball striking. Definitely. And that's what he told me he worked on all the time so he could do those trick shots, was to swing and balance.
Incredible. Take another time out. We'll be right back. You mentioned balance and tempo. Now, I can talk about balance with you all day long. And, you know, we've talked so much on the show, and we had Tony Manzoni on and his single pivot swing and his study of Hogan, and he's convinced that Hogan was doing the same. Where do you fall in all of the single pivot swing that his lost fundamental?
Yeah, I've never actually read anything other. A little bit. I saw the podcast you did with my buddy Justin Tang from about 3 weeks ago. But if you look at the video from Face On, what is clearly obvious is that Hogan did a fundamental that all good ball strikers do, which is the technical term today is separation, which means while your shoulder girdle, your upper torso, is finishing the last 10 to 15 degrees of coiling away from the target, your lower spine, your tailbone, and your hip girdle is shifting laterally toward the target. Now, Hogan started that move much earlier than his contemporaries or even anybody today playing golf. So when his left arm was parallel to the ground or even just below parallel to the ground, he was already starting his lateral hip shift, the so-called separation move. But on the forward swing, his left hip was over his left knee, vertically stacked on top of his left knee, and his left knee was vertically stacked over his stable left foot and ankle. So Hogan called that the gate post, and he taught several people who he mentored. Some of who we've talked about, Chris Cheddar, Julie Miller here in Portland, some other people, Gardner Dickinson, Ken Venturi, a few others I can think of, that you rotated mostly. Obviously, you rotate because your hips are one thing, but you're rotating mostly over your left hip, meaning your pelvic girdle is rotating over a stable left upper thigh bone or femur. And that's obviously what almost all good ball strikers do. I mean, some do it more than others. Some have a slight angle of their leg bone away from the target. Most have their left leg thigh bone 90 degrees to the ground. And hardly any amateurs do that. Amateurs are hanging back. They're not getting their weight shifted over enough.
Well, and also a lot of amateurs I notice on their backswing, their front knee, let's say you're a right-handed golfer, so your left knee on your backswing is pointing way behind you.
Correct.
And I remember Tony, when I met with Tony once, he was making sure that my knee is pointing at the ball on my backswing.
Correct. That's correct. Absolutely. You want your knee, left knee has to flex inward toward the ball, or you could say toward the center of your stance more accurately.
Right.
Yep. And that allows your hip girdle to rotate in what today's parlance is called a centered hip turn, which means even though it's rotating, you got to think in 3D. It is rotating in three-dimensional space, but from a face-on view, which is 2D on a camera or video computer screen, it looks like it's just rotating in a circle, right? Without sliding a lot either direction. It might slide an inch or two to the right, which is what most good ball strikers do. Hogan actually slid an inch to the left a little bit. I think, again, because he was getting a head start on his lateral hip shift separation move. But you don't want a lot of shifting either laterally left or right. So that's what the famous teacher, Percy Boomer, called turning your hips in a barrel. That's the centered hip turn. That's for backswing, right? Not forward. Forward swing, it'd have to shift or slide a little bit toward the target. Yeah. It's a pretty big fundamental. And you got to do that. And by the way, doing it right is how you stay in balance. If you're doing the hip rotation incorrectly, you're going to lose your balance pretty quickly.
I used to have that issue with my driver. I would completely fall out of my position, my stance after I hit the ball. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. If you can get the hips over so that you're basically rotating mainly over your left leg, and not sort of 50-50, then you're already in balance, and then you're going to finish with your weight already on your left leg. So to finish, about 95% of your total body weight should be over a stable left foot and a straight vertical to the ground left leg. And it's just easier to do that if you're already there in the halfway down position when your hands are about hip height on the downswing on the right side of your body for a right-handed golfer. If you look at Hogan, any good ball striker today, even from Hogan's era as well, they've already got their hip over their knee and their knee over their foot. So they're mostly rotating over their left leg. Again, what he called the left leg gate post, what Hogan called it the gate post, which is a good visual metaphor. You know? So I consider myself a mostly centered pivot teacher. I want a mostly centered pivot on the backswing and a mostly centered pivot on the forward swing, but realizing mostly means there has to be a little bit of lateral motion, especially on the backswing. It's a very tiny 1 to 2 inches lateral motion on the backswing,
And with a driver with a wider stance, it's like, 4 to 8 inches of lateral motion by the time you strike the ball on the forward swing. But that's with the lower body. The upper body stays relatively centered, right? So it's almost like your hips are shifting underneath a steady head and steady upper spine, upper sternum. Yeah, because that's the hub. That's where your shoulder girdle rotates around your spine. It's the top of your sternum. And that point needs to be relatively fixed, ideally super fixed in 3D space. Once you get to the early stages of the transition move over with. So when your left arm is parallel, that's the earliest stage of transition's done. And you look at tour pros, from that point of left arm parallel to the ground to left arm parallel to the ground on the left side of the body, their head doesn't move sideways. Their sternum doesn't move sideways. Right? It'll from a 2D perspective, it'll stay fixed in space.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a secret to having solid contact with the ball, because if you can do that, you're going to have better control over where the club bottoms out, the low point.
Which is always hard, like getting that low point and having it in front of the ball, right?
Well,
is the key.
Driver. Except for driver.
Right, because you want to be coming up on your driver.
Correct. So with driver, it should be about an inch behind the ball, ideally.
Right. But on your other clubs,
club, well, like a 3-wood would be directly underneath the ball, a 3-wood off the ground.
Okay.
And every other shot, it's somewhat target side of the ball. Yeah. And into the ground. Like a typical short iron or wedge, you want it to be like a 1/4 inch into the dirt.
Yeah.
And 3 or 4 inches in front of the ball. That's where the low point should be, like on a wedge or like a 9-iron. Yeah.
So it's different for every club.
Correct.
So
it is.
Wow. So then you get into a ball position. Now, interestingly enough, I've been holding this email that I got from a listener, Rich, and he says, the most difficult thing to do correctly shot after shot is find the precise, proper ball position. And the difference between correct and incorrect can be such a slight fraction of an inch. And I'm editing here. He says, as Ken Venturi said, who you brought up, good golfers don't get out of swing, they get out of position. So his question is, when a swing produces a poor shot, why do we always blame the swing? Isn't the ball, that is, its position relative to the swing path, at least equally at fault?
No, because that's one of those, the conclusion you reach is sort of an example of all or nothing thinking, or assigning responsibility to one causal factor. If you know what I know, after being a full-time teacher this is my 32nd year, I think, there's many, many other factors other than ball position that can cause a bad shot. But yes, it is an important factor, but it's not the only one. In other words, I work with guys all the time who are 25 handicaps who have perfect ball position, and they still can't make their low point when they first come to see you where it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. But that could be part of it for sure. And it can affect the starting line direction. If the ball's too far back in your stance and you're a right-handed golfer, you could have Rory McIlroy's golf swing and your driver will go 50 yards or more dead right because it's too far back in your stance. Oh. Which means the club head is coming too far from the inside when it strikes the back of the ball.
Right.
So part of it, what he's saying is, and he's right about this, you know what the term tangent of the arc in geometry means?
Nope. I never took geometry.
Okay. Well, it means if you have a straight line, which is the target line in the ground, or imaginary line, and then you have another object that moves in an arc, there's a point in time where the arc intersects with the straight line. That's called the tangent.
Okay.
Right. So like the club head kind of makes a little shallow arc like this, and you got to make sure the ball is right where it should be on the ground so that you achieve a neutral club head path at the moment of impact. Right. And so if the ball is too far forward in your stance and your swing was perfect, you're going to hit a pull to the left. And if it's too far back in your stance, you're going to hit a push to the right. I just had a student yesterday I was doing a webcam lesson with, and that's what his issue was. In fact, he's a regular listener of your show. He's actually written you about how much he likes your podcast.
Oh, how sweet. I
don't want to say his name because of confidentiality, but he's from Pennsylvania. Let's just say that.
Okay.
And he was on the range. Here I am in Hawaii. He's in Pennsylvania on the range, thanks to the magic of the internet.
And you didn't get it disconnected how could you do it with him and not with me?
No, because his name wasn't Fred Green. That's
okay.
So anyhow, so he says he hits 3 balls in a row, and I the way he had the camera set up, I could, because there was this T marker separator, like on the driver range, in the way. I couldn't quite see his club head. So I was looking at his swing, and he hit 3 pushes that went 30, 40 yards right. And the swing looked good. I know what a push looks like watching the body. Right? In other words, if your right shoulder goes really low on the downswing, that usually means it's a push, right?
Okay.
Because how your spine tilts affects the path. If you tilt too much to the right and you're a right-handed golfer, the path's going to be in to out, causing a push.
Oh.
But he didn't show that. And I said, man, you got to adjust the camera so I can see. So then I could see where the ball was. And his ball was like 5 inches too far back in the stands. So we immediately corrected it, and that was it. He started hitting straight drive after straight drive, fixed it immediately. So it is one of those easy things to fix. And I said to him, you need to put a lineman stick down on the ground for your ball position. You'll almost never see a tour pro without 2 sticks in the ground, one for the target line and one for the ball position, because even they get it wrong. And sometimes the caddy has to say, dude, your ball position's a half a ball width too far forward or too far back in your stance. And the tour pro go, no, it's not. And then he'll get the camera out and show them. And they'll go, holy crap, you're right.
Wow.
It's really common. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's an easy fix. Check your ball position. It's important.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Check what's happening on Golf Smarter Mulligans this week. We'll be right back. This week on Golf Smarter Mulligans is our final episode in our annual Tony Manzoni series to help you launch your new golf season. This episode, called There's No Pressure in Golf, It's All Perception, covers topics like choosing the right club off the tee, balance, and how we may be putting too much emphasis on distance over accuracy.
Lee Trevino once was talking about playing with Nicklaus and how far Nicklaus hit it compared to everybody else. And he says, so when I played with Nicklaus, I would try to hit the ball 230 yards off the tee. And when I did that, I hit it about 270. He said, but when I tried to hit it 270, I hit it 230. That's just such great wisdom, because that's so much the truth. How many times have we got up on a par 5 and it's a long one, so we're going to give it that extra, and we throw it from the top and we get a little steep with it, and we pop it straight up in the air like a wedge, or we hit it way right or way left. There's a speed that you have to get used to with the driver. And a lot of it has to do with defocusing on any thought of hitting and swinging from point A to point B in a rhythm that you can keep your balance. And if you do that with the driver, you're going to keep the ball in play most of the time.
That's Golf Smarter Mulligans, episode 208, the final episode in our series featuring our friend and mentor, Tony Manzoni. Once again, your ongoing feedback has been confirmation that this series is worth sharing to launch the new golf season every year. So thanks again for your participation. Check the show notes to learn how to get Tony's book, The Lost Fundamental, One Simple Move, Better Golf Forever, and gain access to his video of the same name. Please subscribe for free to both of our golf podcasts, Golf Smarter, published every Tuesday since 2005, and our sister podcast that revisits the best of Golf Smarter podcasts called Golf Smarter Mulligans, being released every Friday from wherever you're listening right now.
Every time we do this, you get better.
Oh, thank you.
Seriously. Think about it. If your golf swing was as good as your podcasting skill, you'd be like a +3 handicap. Wouldn't that be cool?
I don't know what to do with that line, but how does all this, what we talked about, because this comes up a lot, stack and tilt versus the single pivot. Where are you with stack and tilt? What does it mean to you? And
yeah, I'm not a fan of stack and tilt. I know a little about the background because I was working with Mac O'Grady in the same golf school that the 2 founders of stack and tilt were. And I know enough about the Morad system, Mac O'Grady system, to know that he has 9 trajectory he teaches. And the ninth trajectory is called low-low. So there's a low trajectory, a mid trajectory, a high. And with each of those 3, there's a low-low, a mid-low, and a high-low, for example. And it's a punch shot. And so they took what was designed to be more or less a specialty shot, or maybe if you played in a super windy environment like Scotland or something. And they turned it into a swing instruction system, I think, because for high handicappers, it produces almost immediate improvement in every club from like a wedge to maybe a 600, where you have to hit down. And then as the clubs get longer, you have to hit less down. Mm-hmm. It didn't work well, and it didn't work really well at all, especially with the driver. So for a really high handicap, it kind of made sense that that would help them in the short term. But, you know, it's like, I believe that golf instructors should take a Hippocratic oath like doctors should take, first do no harm. The goal should be to help that person play better golf, not just for the next, say, 6 months, but for maybe the rest of their life. So you always want to think as an instructor, what can I do to help this person be headed in the right direction long term, as well as short term? It's a balancing act. And I think they emphasize too much the short-term results for high handicaps. And, of course, that's what happened. They worked with one of the instruction editors at Golf Digest, who was a 28 handicap at the time. And it really helped them a lot. And so they did 2 cover stories in a row.
Oh.
And that's how they got famous.
Interesting.
Yeah. But, no, I think it's an extreme example of binary thinking. For example, most swing corrective drills, which is another way of saying when you're working on a swing flaw, it's not the only way, but the primary way is, it's like the old joke. People say, how do you teach a high handicapper to stop slicing? And the answer is you teach them to hook the ball, right?
You teach them to what?
You teach them to hook it.
Oh, okay.
You do the opposite.
Sure.
And most swing corrective instruction is based on that opposite principle. Move the needle in the opposite direction.
I see.
But what I teach is I want you to know what the middle is on the spectrum. So if one is a flaw, let's say one is increasing your spine angle, right, closer to the ground, and 10 is the opposite flaw, standing up. And the model, the ideal would be in the middle. That would be 5, right? But if you're standing up, which is what almost all amateurs do for a variety of reasons, and if I say to you, stay down, stay level, you might go from a 10 to a 9. But if I say try to lower your chest 8 inches to the ground, which would be a flaw if you did it, you might stay level, but you might say, wait, I did. You said I stayed. You know, I dipped 8 inches, and I show the guy in the video. You didn't dip at all, right? We call that brain boundary learning or moving the needle, right? And so you have to know when you're working on swing flaws when to back off and stop taking the medicine, basically, because otherwise it could create the opposite flaw.
Right.
And I see this, even though I warn against this, I still see it a lot in my teaching. People go from one extreme to the other,
and they do that during a round of golf.
Sometimes, yeah. Which drives
It's
them
like,
crazy.
oh, it's not working today, so I'm going to do something completely opposite. Really?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then
my thing is don't try to change your swing on the golf course. Play with the flaws you have. Fix them. All the fixing has to be done off the golf course.
Right. Absolutely.
And easy to say, hard to do.
No question.
But it is the right thing to do.
Huh. You mentioned Mac O'Grady a minute ago. You must know Kevin Rabalski, who we had on the show just recently. Because he's in Hawaii right now. You're in Hawaii.
I think he's still. I could be wrong, but he might be still at Kolau. He was the teaching pro at Kolau. It's a public course. Right?
Yeah, he's running the course now.
Oh, is he really? Oh, interesting. Yeah. And then he was assistant pro under our buddy Greg Nichols, who's the director of golf where I teach at Colina.
Right.
When Greg was the head pro at Wiley, where they have the Hawaiian Open.
And I wanted to thank you for introducing me to Greg. He introduced me to Kevin, and I've asked Greg multiple times to be on the show, and he will not.
I'm going to keep working on it. He is one of the greatest resources on golf that I know of. He knows so many top people in the industry.
Yeah. Oh, he's introducing me to people, but he won't talk to me.
Yeah, he's a really good teacher. He really understands the game. He's really good on the mental side. He's good buds with Paul Azinger and Scott Simpson. He talks to them about what it's like playing and winning majors. I mean, Paul won one, and I think Scott won 2 U.S. Opens, if I remember right. So his knowledge of the game is amazing. He'd be great to have on.
Yeah.
Can I talk about the yips? We got a couple more minutes on the yip shift.
Sure.
That's what I'm calling it.
Sure. I was gonna ask you about. I had 2 more things on my list, but let's do yips because that's your thing.
The interesting thing this will blow your mind. There's been a big change in what I call the yips cultures, for want of a better term, which is we did a podcast 3 years ago, and the title of the podcast was You never experience a yip without a ball. And now I've had 5 people in the last year who have, and not mild yips, but almost as severe on a practice swing as with the ball. Ooh. And multiple yips. Ooh. So I'm seeing an increase in the overall incidence of people contacting me for yips. And I don't think it's just because my reputation is getting better. That's a little bit. I think it's becoming more common in the game. Right. And the severity has gone way up. It used to get Normally, about 90% of my yip students would have one yip at some point in the swing. Might be a backswing yip, more typically a forward swing or forward stroke yip. Now I'm getting people with 3 or 4 or 5 yips per swing. It's like, it really is amazing. And to the point where I've had these 5 people. Now, one of them came to see me at Quail Valley, where you and I were about 12 years ago, swinging as a lefty. And his first few swings were done without a ball, and they were so bad, he had like about 5 or 6 yips per practice swing. I mean, you remember what Charles Barkley looked like with the ball.
Yeah. Like
10 times worse than that.
Oh, ouch.
And I said to myself in my mind, I said, oh, I'm good at this, but I'm not an effing miracle worker. There is no way I can help this guy. And then I heard a voice in my head say, Jim, switch him over to being a righty. Because I got my bag of clubs sitting there. And I said, dude, would you be open to switching sides and playing righty? Here's my 7-iron.
Wait.
He was a left-handed golfer, and I switched him over to righty, and it fixed his yips instantly.
But wait. So, like, when he was a kid, did he play baseball and he was a switch hitter? Because if you handed me a left-handed club, I'd look like a 2-year-old.
No, he was dominant. He was a dominant left-hand player. He's from Canada. He played hockey left-hand. He was a lefty his whole life. He was also a good athlete, which helps.
It definitely helps. But you suggested try this right-handed, and he had a good swing. And
it was. If you saw him swing his very first swing righty without a ball, you would think he was maybe a 10 handicap or better.
Oh wow!
He took about half a dozen swings. I teed up a ball on a short tee. His first shot went 145 yards dead straight in the air with a 7-iron. Get this. 6 weeks later, he shot 78 as a righty.
Oh my gosh!
He still putts lefty, but everything else he does right. So he had to get obviously a whole new bag of clubs. He
didn't care. I'm sure he didn't care.
Well,
it's like, oh yeah, I'll go on.
I said no. It might take you 2 years to get over the yips because you had so many mechanical flaws on top of the yip, and he had 5 different yips. Oh. Because what most people do, which is wrong, is when they get the yips, they go to traditional golf teachers who diagnose it incorrectly as a mechanical flaws. And so they fill their head with swing thoughts, and now they're not going external, they're going internal in the worst possible way.
The worst possible way.
And the next thing they know, they don't know what to do with body and club. They're completely confused.
Oh. Right?
So in this case, he was completely open to it. And I had I can't tell the guy's name, but let's just say he's one of the top high school players in the country and now playing college golf. And he had a pretty severe case of putting yips. He went through my online program. He was about 90% cured, but every once in a while, he would still have a mild yip. He said to me one day, what if I just switched over to the final cure, that last little step to putting lefty? Oh. And he did, and that was it. That final change from going from righty to lefty, that was it. That put the nail in the coffin for his yips. Wow. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah, so at some point, will either of these guys go back? Think okay, good. I've got that. That's way in my past now.
Well, I know what people have tried to do that. People I've worked with the yips, they've tried doing that. They always come back. It's pretty amazing how the yips can stick around in the unconscious memory.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with one of the what I call the main fuels. There's about 5 main fuel tanks, and one of them is called fear of yipping. So when someone has yips, they reach a point maybe 6 months into it, a year into it, 5 years into it, where they're not even that concerned about hitting the bad shot anymore. They have fear of actually yipping. So they're more afraid of the yip happening than they are of the bad shot that the standard yip would produce.
Interesting.
And I call that fear of yipping, which then fuels it. So one of the cures is you have to yip on purpose to break the cycle. And of course, if you're yipping on purpose, it's not truly a yip because yips are 100% involuntary.
Wow.
There's a saying, and I think we've talked about this in the past, there's a saying in the speech pathology community that stuttering, or one form of stuttering, happens when the stutterer tries not to stutter.
Sure.
It triggers you. And so when you try not to yip with emotion, not mentally, that's different, but when you try not to yip in other words, if you have fear of yipping, it's like you're telling your subconscious, time to yip, and your body does.
I remember when I used to ride bicycles, and this was all the way up into my 40s. I mean, I haven't ridden a bicycle in a long time because I just have too many friends that are falling off their bicycles. So, but I remember when I used to ride bicycles and I had to go through a narrow spot, all of a sudden I was shaky on the bike. I mean, like I was confident as a kid. I was riding with no hands, no problem, anything. But then all of a sudden, I'm thinking, don't mess this up, and bang,
exactly. Yeah. Or like driving a car. If you're not experienced, if you go skiing and you live in, say, like Portland, where it doesn't hardly ever snows in the winter, and it melts off within a day, and you go to Mount Hood, where it's icy roads, and you're not experienced driving, people tighten up. So they get driving yips, so to speak, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's another one of the main fuels. Zero confidence is another one of the main fuel tanks that drives the yips.
Unbelievable. Always entertaining, always educational.
Are we done? Was there another question?
No. We're wrapping it up here. Okay. Tell people again how to get in touch with you.
BalancePointGolf.com. That's the easiest way.
Easiest way.
Just email on.
And Jim will have no technical issues with you. It's just me.
It's just you. Yeah. Okay, man. All right. Thank you, Fred. Thanks for having me on again.
And, if this is the 32nd year of you teaching and this was your 32nd appearance,
that's right.
Next year we'll have to do only one appearance. No, we're going to do more than one. We always do more than one. All right, buddy. Yep. Be well. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Fred. Take care.
So back in January of this year, we met up with Brinson Paolini of Sharp Focus Nutrition. And they were even generous enough to sponsor the show for a couple of months. This isn't an ad, but I did want to share with you a couple of updates that I received recently from Brinson. One, they've put together some short videos regarding on-course eating and hydration, which now live on their website, sharpfocusnutrition.com, and they can also be found on their YouTube channel. But more importantly, at least for me, is that they now offer a variety that I was hoping for. These include dried mangoes versus dried apricots, and you can choose. I lean toward the mangoes. Roasted cashews versus roasted almonds. Definitely a cashew guy. And the big one for me, plant-based jerky versus beef jerky. And even though I've never been a fan of beef jerky itself, the plant-based jerky is pretty darn good. I've tried it now, and I'm really impressed. So to avoid crashing at the end of your next round or have the wheels fall off, don't eat a big meal at the turn. Graze through your round. Remember, sip and nibble, and do it with the healthy, scientifically developed, golfer-focused Sharp Focus Nutrition. I want to give a shout out to Michael Goodhand of Meaford, Ontario, Canada, for opening up today's episode. As our newest Golf Smarter ambassador, Michael will have a choice of receiving Tony Manzoni's video of the Lost Fundamental or a glove and glove storage compartment from his fellow Canadians at redroostergolf.com, a unique glove subscription service that offers many styles of gloves in 26 sizes for both men and women. Now, you too are invited to join our exclusive global community of Golf Smarter ambassadors by introducing an upcoming episode. Just send an email and I'll get back to you with some simple instructions of what to do and what to say. Write to golfsmarterpodcast@gmail.com or visit golfsmarter.com and click on the Hey Fred button. Hey Fred button. Hey Fred button. Hey Fred button. All right, enough. We're in the countdown for episode 900 coming in June, and we've got some interesting new guests and some of our old favorites returning to help you become a better, smarter golfer. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for upcoming episodes, please click on the Hey Fred button. Yeah, we just discussed Hey Fred, didn't we? When you visit golfsmarter.com.